The reading this morning is by Parker Palmer, and it's an excerpt from an article titled "Fierce with Reality, Living and Loving Well Until the End." Parker begins the article with this quote from Florida Scott Maxwell. "You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, you are fierce with reality." Parker continues, stating that he was a reasonably normal person, and now I'm quoting, "a complex and conflicted soul who yearned to be whole. I wanted a life of personal fulfillment that served others well, a life of love of self and others, and I knew that getting there would require me to be fierce with reality." But he didn't, he says, at age 43, have the courage required to truly possess all I had been and done. Back to Palmer's words. "At age 76, I know there are no shortcuts to wholeness. The only way to become whole is to put our arms lovingly around everything we've shown ourselves to be, self-serving and generous, spiteful and compassionate, cowardly and courageous, treacherous and trustworthy. We must be able to say to ourselves and to the world at large, 'I am all of the above.' If we can't embrace the whole of who we are, embrace it with transformative love, we'll imprison the creative energies hidden in our own shadows and flee from the world's complex mix of shadow and light. Wholeness is the goal, but wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life. The sooner we understand this, the better. It's a truth that can set us free to live well and to love well, and in the end, to die well. I can't think of a sadder way to die than with the knowledge that I never showed up in this world as who I really am. I can't think of a more graced way to die than with the knowledge that, as best I knew how, I showed up here as my true self, able to engage the world in freedom and with love, because I had become fierce with reality." The sky is utterly cloudless blue, the three-quarter moon a pale whisper in the southwest. The wind is quiet, reminding me of its presence with only an occasional gentle caress. Bird songs and chirps are most of the sounds. Surrounding me are the buttes of the western North Dakota Badlands. I'm in the Whitetail Flats section of Sully Creek State Park last Sunday, a gloriously perfect late July day, and it is the perfect place to be thinking about death. Today's topic, a good death, was my suggestion to the program team. You get what you ask for, right? Not too long ago. I didn't really expect to be doing it this soon, but when I was asked, I figured, well, I might as well get it done. But I do have a couple of caveats for you. The first relates to the last, few weeks or months, I guess, in our country's history. I have felt for a variety of reasons that the world, possibly even the universe, has been tossed into the air like pickup sticks and is even now raining down around my ears in new configurations, and where it is all to settle is still beyond determining or imagining. It's an uncomfortable feeling, a painful, anxiety-provoking feeling. There has been far too much unexpected, unplanned, unnecessary death, and in numbers of those cases, seemingly unfair and inappropriate death. There was a point earlier this month when it occurred to me, and I had a couple of conversations about the fact that talking about death in the context that I'm using is just another example of our white privilege, that we even get to consider how we want our lives to be at the end, that we may have less fear as we step out into the world on any given day of death stalking us from unexpected quarters. To an extent far greater than it should be, that is true for our brothers and sisters of color. Sadly, as we have also seen, Such violence can strike anyone, anytime, any place. There has always been needless, heedless killing and death on our streets, and in recent time it seems to have gathered a terrible momentum for which we must find an answer or all succumb, if not physically, emotionally, and morally. Nothing less, in my view, than our humanity is at stake, the deepest core of our hearts, souls, our essence as decent, caring human beings. As a way of honoring the grief and fear we have seen in the world of late, I'm offering this poem written in response to some of those incidents by a friend and former colleague, Terry Spencer Edwards. Even the sky is crying. Blue-gray streaks of bitter rain scorch the earth and feed seeds of distrust across the once fertile ground. Green turns to black and blue, white fades into red and emptiness. Thunder pierces the silence of eyes in a constant state of questioning. What did I do to deserve your lightning and disdain? Why am I not worthy of breathing? My skin believed to have feeling. Clouds hover above the face, pressed into soil and tamped down into obscurity. What is the name written across the stars on this day turned to night, waiting for the dawning, when the tears falling from the sky whisper of the sun just on the other side of these heavy clouds? I will let this context rest here for now, with thanks to all of you for hearing and perhaps sharing my dismay and concern. The second caveat is simply this. I don't know all the answers. In fact, I'm not really sure I have any answers for anyone but myself. What I have to say today is based on my own experience, thought process, and on a little bit of reading from the myriad resources available on end-of-life issues and decisions. And I wanted to maybe have a handout with some of those that I've seen or looked at available, but I didn't get that done. But I'd be happy to visit with anybody who's interested. At the outset, and this is really my interest and commitment, while we need to have discussions about death and dying, the real challenge is to live as well as possible until such time as our last breath becomes part of the air and the wind and our bodies return to the earth. So, death. It is a topic of my choosing, sprung from my thinking over the last few months about the prospect of death and dying, and brought into greater focus and deeper awareness by the diagnosis I received last fall of stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. As I've met with my doctors, they have assured me that there are many possible treatments, and that when one fails or ceases to be effective, there will be another to try. One doctor recently told me she loves breast cancer because she rarely sees her patients die. Nonetheless, I must live with the knowledge, imparted at my request by the Boston specialist that I see, that the median lifespan for those of us in this circumstance is 3 to 5 years. So half live longer and half not as long. When is it that we start thinking about death? I didn't experience the death of anyone close to me until I was in college. My mother's mother died first, and unexpectedly our next door neighbor, my mother's best friend, died later the same week. My father's mother died a year later. In none of these cases did I or my siblings have any prior awareness that it was imminent, or any direct contact with those relatives as they neared the end. It did cause my brother, who was 6 or 7 at the time, to declare he wanted to be an undertaker. That didn't last. He became an accountant. So perhaps it is the experience of death that first brings it into our consciousness, whether far too soon or at a point where we have some grasp of its finality. As many of us probably do, I spent the remainder of my adulthood with only occasional thoughts of death when it touched me or someone I knew. Somewhat remarkably, in our late 50s, Stephen and I both had all 4 of our parents living. My mother was the first to go, and her death was my first direct experience of the physical process. I stayed with my parents for the 6 weeks she was on hospice, essentially managing all of her care: dressing, feeding, toileting, changing, bathing, medicating. In that time, she went from being up and around with substantial help to being bedridden, to declining food, to unconsciousness, and finally late one afternoon, drawing her last breath. Prior to her final decline, Mom had for some years been falling further and further into the dark pit of dementia, her mental and physical capacity slipping away as we watched. Her decline, and now my father's similar one, have made it abundantly clear to me what I don't want. Should I live long enough to experience a similar mental disintegration, I want my children and loved ones to know it is okay not to make me and my needs the focal point of their lives. They should live their lives without the daily worry and burden of my care. That is one of the conversations we were unable to have with my parents. To a great degree, they were unwilling to acknowledge and even denied repeatedly their growing needs for help or that there was any indication of mental decline. So I say to my family, and even to all of you, if you see this happening to me, tell me. I hope I will be able to hear it and respond and plan appropriately. And if I don't, my family has my permission to take whatever steps they think are in my best interest and consistent with what I have told them I want. For myself, and only for me, should it become clear that I am headed toward dementia, or if I am unlucky enough to have this cancer affect my brain, I would seriously consider moving to Oregon or New York, or a state that allows assistance in determining the time of the end of life. For many, that decision, or even the decision about life-prolonging care, may be complicated by our fear of death, as we always have some level of fear of the unknown. In a book titled The Good Death, Anne Newman states, in regard to whether treatment is considered futile, one of those factors is our fear of death, not just the physical pain of death, but of everything surrounding it too, like the abandonment of loved ones, the loss of physical control, the end of the world as we know it. Like all mysteries, death scares even the strongest of believers in hope, in heaven, in a better life after death. While doubts and fears about death are common, even natural, they are abetted by decades of science's hopeful promise to cure old age or to mitigate death. The reality is, none of us gets out of this alive. As I have thought about it and tried to process my perspective, I've gotten to a point where I don't think I'm afraid to die. I certainly consider all of the elements that Anne Newman mentions, but it is, after all, part of an eternal cycle, the circle of life. Quaker theologian Parker Palmer comments in an article titled A Wilderness Pilgrimage, Where We Go When We Die. I learned long ago how much I do not know, so I will not be surprised if death has surprises in store for me. But amid all my not knowing, I am certain of two things. When we die, our bodies return to the earth, and earth knows how to turn death into new life. When my own small life ends in some version of wind and fire, my body will be transformed by the same alchemy that keeps making all things new. As the medieval alchemists dreamed, dross will be turned into gold. It's all good, and it's all gold, a vast web of life in which body and spirit are one. Now we get a list. The Amateur's Guide to Death and Dying, Enhancing the End of Life by Richard Wagner lists 11 qualities of a good death according to research. They are having control over the specific dying process, pain-free status, engagement with religion or spirituality, experiencing emotional well-being, having a sense of life completion or legacy, having a choice in treatment preferences, experiencing dignity in the dying process, having family present and saying goodbye, quality of life during the dying process, a good relationship with healthcare providers, and a miscellaneous other category that would include cultural specifics or having pets nearby, healthcare costs. Clearly, those measures assume the individual has awareness and acceptance of their circumstances and the ability to be present with family and those providing care. Would it were always so. In my estimation, my mother was pain-free, had a measure of dignity to the extent we could provide it. And while she had family present to say goodbye, her inability to understand what was happening or voice her thoughts and feelings left us all with a sense of incompleteness, of opportunity lost. Wagner continues saying, people who talk openly about death when they are in good health have a greater chance of facing their own deaths with equanimity. We do need to think and talk about death before it becomes imminent or before it takes us unexpectedly, and let people know what it is we expect, what we think we want, how we think we want that process to take place. In my view, another significant part of this equation is for medical practitioners to become more open and realistic in their approach to discussing death, and to realize that prolonging life is not always the answer. Sometimes death is an appropriate outcome. According to Mary Jo Bennett, longtime hospice volunteer and author of When Autumn Comes, Creating Compassionate Care for the Dying, this pathway of approaching change and the myriad losses that accompany old age and dying seems to offer a more reliable and stable access to true equanimity, the landmark of aging with grace. For those dealing with a life-threatening illness, the time invested in battling the odds and going for the gold, the next treatment, may rob them of a treasure trove of present moments lying right at their feet. It is absolutely appropriate and necessary to take certain steps towards establishing one's wishes and preferences for the end of life, using all the tools that are available, such as advance directives, do not resuscitate orders, and one I've recently learned of called POLST, P-O-L-S-T. It stands for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And that creates, following a discussion between doctor and patient, specific medical orders to be honored by healthcare workers during a medical crisis. And you can certainly Google that for more details. My view is that those steps, while important, are not sufficient to our ultimate well-being and sense of comfort with the process of dying. We need to have thought deeply enough about and communicated clearly enough what it is we really want. If you do nothing else in the days ahead, if you haven't already, I hope you will read Atul Gawande's excellent book, Being Mortal. His emphasis, which I heartily endorse and am trying to take to heart, is that the important perspective is not so much planning your dying as it is making sure you're living well right up until the end. The questions he offers for consideration by doctor and patient are these 5. What is your understanding of where you are and of your illness? I think that in itself is so critical, because I sometimes think that our healthcare practitioners are trying to protect us and aren't willing, unless we really press, to give us reality or specific information about what's going on. So this is a question they might ask, and then that would engender a discussion. His second item is, what are your fears or worries for the future? What are your goals and priorities? What outcomes are unacceptable to you? What are you willing to sacrifice and not? And finally, what would a good day look like? This is what I'm trying to do and hope to do in my journey, to balance the options and opportunities of treatment with the treasure of the present moments, to make sure that I am seeing the beauty and grace of this world and those around me, and not just that little gray cloud that hovers always on the edge of my awareness. To live each moment not in fear of the inevitable future, which is what we all face, but with appreciation for what is, what can be, what will be. Especially in these days of feeling mostly well, but even when the time comes that I don't feel so well, I hope to be open as well as realistic and to find a place of comfort, acceptance, and peace for myself and those I love. It is what it is. Blessed be, and namaste.